Kavlov Sanctuary is an open-world Mork Borg module designed by the Dungeon Key, and it is compatible with just about any old-school role-playing game that you'd like to play. As you can see here, it has 5 new classes and 13 dungeons available for you and your party to explore. And just for full disclosure, Jean-Luc from the Dungeons Key did reach out to me to see if I would be interested in checking this book out for review on the channel. I obviously agreed under the condition that I could give my full unbiased opinion on the book. And I am happy to report that I really love this book, and as a GM who just ran the Keep on the Borderlands, the classic original D&D module that this book is based on with Old School Essentials, I have to say that if you're interested in checking out that extremely popular starter module for old school role-playing games, this book is the solution that you need at your table. Okay, and here we have the title page. Of course, writing and layout is done by Jean-Luc of the Dungeons Key. We have our artist here, and something that Jean-Luc specifically asked that I point out is that the cover of this book was AI generated. So if that's something that bothers you, please be aware of it. Speaking of things that might bother you or people at your table, there is a content warning here, and it's always good to have a session 0 discussion of certain topics that may be disturbing or uncomfortable for players at the table, especially when it comes to a Mork Borg module like this. So I really appreciate the transparency of these topics that you can discuss with your players before you get into it. And of course, you can always modify things or cut things or just completely ignore things if it's too much. Having said that, it is Mork Borg, so I would encourage everyone to just kind of have fun with it and not take things too seriously. Okay, and we're already on pages 2 and 3, and we are getting to the highlight, in my opinion, of this book's layout, and that is the way that the Dungeons Key has really zooped up this verbose, dense, but insanely popular and beloved starter adventure in D&D history into an extremely usable book for the table. And that cannot be demonstrated any better than this one-page guide for the GM. So everything that you need to know about running this adventure is right here on page 3. If you're not acquainted to running old school role-playing games, this might be a bit intimidating to you, or you might even think it's too sparse, and how can I run an entire campaign just off of the information on this page? Well, that's the amazing thing about old school role-playing games and indie products like this. It's just enough to get your brain juices flowing, and of course you're going to need more information, you're going to need more for the players to dig their teeth into. That's provided by further information in the book, of course, but also your own imagination and your players' imagination. One of the standout features of old school role-playing games is that they encourage, in fact require, the players and the GM to create the story together at the table rather than having the GM create a sprawling adventure from scratch for the players to move through like a predetermined video game almost. We also have our unique classes here, a section on lore, a section on wilderness, the dreaded hills themselves, which is the analog for the Caves of Chaos in the original module, and that's it. So everything you need to know about the book is right here. Now, in quick comparison, this is my Kinko's printed version of the Keep on the Borderlands, and I wanted to show you the dense Gygaxian prose of the Dungeon Master's Guide section of this book to really drive home the point that I'm making here. Okay, so what the Dungeons Key was able to compact down into one page, we have starting here in the original Keep in the Borderlands module, and as you can see already, this is like reading a text post. Gary describes the Keep as a microcosm, a world in miniature. Within its walls, your players will find what is basically a small village with a social order and will meet opponents of a sort. Outside lines, yada 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 yada. The Gygaxian prose here is intense, and as someone who reveres the masters, the founders of our hobby and our craft as dungeon masters, I really wanted to take this on and run it, and I did. But I have to say, reading through this is intimidating, and it is just a lot of verbose, rambly text to the point where it made me feel like I don't even know where to start. And that is my biggest compliment for this book, is that it is extremely usable at the table. Now, something that sets apart Kavlov's Sanctuary from the original module it's based on is the unique classes. They are very Mork Borg-y in flavor, as you can see with the name like Fleshweaver, as well as this awesome art here. And I don't want to spoil them all for you here, but something that I do want to point out is the Skin Bastard. And that is because the Skin Bastard is directly influenced by things that go on in the lore and things that your players can discover and things that can happen to your players while you're playing through this adventure. So I really appreciate that the Dungeons Key has gone the extra mile to incorporate classes that you can not only use in other Mork Borg games, but are directly influenced by what is going on in the lore of this game when you're running it for your players. And here again we have the lore section, and everything that you need to know is right here on page 11. I really like the nice black and white layout. I have to admit, when I previewed the PDF version, I felt a little bit underwhelmed, I should say, with the art and the layout. But once you have it in your hands and you think about using it at the table, I really believe that less is more. Especially for somebody like me, I can get very overwhelmed or overstimulated at the table trying to run everything and keep track of everything. So if you have a little brain fart moment like I often do when I'm running a game, you can just flip to this one page and immediately look for Balthazar and kind of quickly refresh yourself, pull yourself back into the moment, and that is indispensable. And again, the Sanctuary itself, where we had Gary writing 5, 6, 7, 8 dense pages of thick, verbose lore about how the Sanctuary is a microcosm of society itself. The Dungeons Key has distilled all of that into 2 quick columns with this nice, very old school inspired art to kind of pull you in and keep you aware of what's going on. But again, what took Gary 8 pages of dense textbook-like speech to get across, the Dungeons Key does it in very little. So for example, bodies of the deceased are not to be disturbed or to be mishandled. And first transgressions are 250 silver, second transgressions are 500 silver, and third transgression means death. So that gives you an idea that this is a place of law and order, but it is said in a few sentences instead of thousands. Another fantastic piece of Kavlov's that I wanted to highlight is how they handle the interior of the Sanctuary itself. So for those not in the know, the Sanctuary essentially acts as a resting place, a waypoint. It's kind of like a save point or a level up point where the players can come back after adventures and rest, meet people, interact with townspeople, and level up, bring their gold back, bring their silver back, and get stronger. And what I really appreciate here is this map looks very much like something that a GM would use to keep track of everything, right? And everything is numbered very concisely, and so, for example, the watchtower is right here on the map, and the watchtower is right here on the map. The chapel is right here on the map, and the chapel is right here. Of course, you can't get everything on this map on one page, but you can flip here, and again, it's very easy to digest and understand. In comparison and keep on the Borderlands, you have the map randomly kind of in the back half of the book. There's a lot more points to keep track of, and not only that, if you flip to the next page, suddenly we're looking at magic user and elf spells, we're looking at wandering monster tables, and if you flip through here, this is actually describing the interior of the mega dungeon that the players will be exploring. It has nothing to do with the keep itself. To find what is going on in the keep, you have to flip back to pages, looks like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, further in the book. So the organization of the original is really difficult to grapple with. But that is not something that you have to worry about with Kavlov's Sanctuary. And so, like I said in the beginning of the video, you can think of Kavlov's Sanctuary as a type of open world sandbox module for your players. And this is the open world. So it's not overwhelming at all. And it's enough to make your players feel like they're in a sprawling adventure. They can go where they want, they can do what they want. But for the GM, you don't have to overwhelm yourself with too much prep. The Sanctuary is right here. The Dreaded Hills is the mini mega dungeon of sorts, a bit of a non sequitur there, that they will be going to most often, venturing to and trying to clear out and thwart the evils that exist in the dreaded hills. But there's also a wilderness section here with other waypoints and interesting things for them to explore. But again, numbered super easily and very easily accessible. So for example, say that your players decide to venture forth into the wilderness and they stumble upon this tower here, which is marked 2. All you have to do is flip to the next page. And you see right here, number 2 is the carnivorous keep. Now, you can only imagine what that might entail for your players, but because that's right here, even if you didn't have time to prep or you weren't expecting your players to go there, if they stumble upon the carnivorous keep, you can read this very briefly and immediately start coming up with an adventure, a scenario with your players on the spot. And that really is the magic of old school role-playing. And finally, we have the Dreaded Hills here, which is the analog for the Caves of Chaos from the original Keep on the Borderlands. On the page here, page 29, you can see obviously that Jean-Luc has the entire dungeon laid out for you in a very blue ink topographical old school style map that I really love. It shows a reverence and respect for the source material, but just knocks it out of the park. So if you get lost as a GM where these different sections of the dungeon connect with each other, it's right here on page 29. 1 square equals 10 feet, just a nice reminder there. And again, for comparison, this is the map that you are contending with in the original, which to be fair is still pretty usable, but the layout itself and the flipping around is just incomparable to what the Dungeon Key has done with Kavlov's. Now, because the Dreaded Hills is the real meat and potatoes of the adventure, I'm not going to dive into the nitty-gritty of it all, but I do want to highlight one individual section again to give you a comparison of Kavlov's against the original. So here we have Dungeon Room A, which is known as the Dwarfling Cave in Kavlov's Sanctuary. As you can see, again, this entire section of the dungeon is contained on just these 2-page spread. You could even use any of these sections of dungeon as a one-shot. You could pull them out and stick them into a campaign that you're running separate from this, and they work really well modularly in that way. So, once again, this is the dungeon map for Keep on the Borderlands, and it is not broken up individually into sections like it is in Kavlov's. So, this is what you have to work with if you're running the OG game and you have Dungeon Section A here. But to find the interior of Dungeon Section A, you'll have to make your way to page 14. And not only do you have to make your way to page 14, but if you get into reading the description of the second room where the giant rats are living, this sentence is cut off, and then, no, it does not carry over to the next page. The next page is where you can find the Overland Wilderness maps and the Keep maps. You have to keep flipping through this and then get back to the section that you were reading here on page 15. And again, look at how dense, how much text there is to get through. It is a bit of a nightmare to run at the table. In comparison, looking at this 2-page spread is a breath of fresh air. It's everything you need to know. I can't sing its praises enough. And that is Kavlov's Sanctuary in a nutshell. It is a classic module for original D&D, repurposed and redistilled for Mork Borg or any other old school role-playing game that you want to run. As a GM who has just run the original using old school essentials, I cannot recommend this book enough. And I would say that if you're interested in running the Keep on the Borderlands with your table, Kavlov's Sanctuary is an excellent alternative that I would recommend you check out. I always encourage supporting independent creators like Jean-Luc. He's a great guy, he's very passionate, and he does an amazing job. If you're interested in picking up Kavlov's Sanctuary, you can get the PDF on ttrpg, or you can pick up a physical copy through Exalted Funeral, and the links are in the description below. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Venture forth.